Finally, let's discuss plate tectonic theory. Remember the expression, "that is only theory." Usually it means the answer or observation is of limited use or limited interest. But no, that is not the case in sciences. In sciences, a theory is a well-tested and widely accepted view that scientists agree best explain the observations. A theory becomes a paradigm because it can explain a large number of interrelated aspects. Tectonic plate theory is a paradigm. Let me repeat this. In sciences, a theory is a well-tested and widely accepted view that scientists agree best explain the observations. A theory becomes a paradigm because it can explain a large number of interrelated aspects. Tectonic plate theory is a paradigm. Now we need a theory which can explain all of the following observations: earthquake and volcano correlations, and the fact that sometimes there are no correlations; continental drift; large mid-ocean ridge systems; deep oceanic trenches; seamount chains; rift valleys within ridges, and more. The tectonic theory aims to explain all of these observations. Only recently, between 1960 and 1970, was the theory of plate tectonics developed to explain the correlations among earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, continental drift, mid-ocean ridge systems, deep oceanic trenches, and seamount chains, among other phenomena. The paper of three seismologists of Lamont, which were Brian Isaacs, Jack Oliver, and Lynn Sykes, was published in the Journal of Geophysical Research in 1968. This was a significant turning point in the acceptance of the plate tectonic theory by the scientific community. Basically, they organized their seismic observations into coherent tables, which incontrovertibly showed the partition of the globe into moving tectonic plates. Please pay attention to the arrows. They indicate the speed and directions of plate motions. Note that the tectonic map does not coincide with the geographic map. Earth's lithosphere is divided into 14 plates. The plates move relative to each other at rates of 1 to 15 centimeters per year, resulting in continental drift. Deformation occurs at plate boundaries, while internally the plates remain largely intact. The map of Earth's surface constantly changes because of plate tectonics. This is a dynamic planet. The 14 tectonic plates include the North American plate, Juan de Fuca plate, Pacific plate, the Cocos plate, the Caribbean plate, the Nazca plate, the Scotia plate, the Eurasian plate, the Arabian plate, the Australian Indian plate, the Philippine plate, the South American plate, the African plate, and the Antarctic plate. These again are the 14 tectonic plates: the North American plate, Juan de Fuca plate, Pacific Plate, Cocos Plate, Caribbean Plate, Nazca Plate, Scotia Plate, Eurasian Plate, Arabian Plate, Australian Indian Plate, Philippine Plate, South American Plate, African Plate, and the Antarctic Plate. Here are the basic principles of plate tectonics. It starts with Earth's lithosphere, which is divided into 14 plates. The plates move relative to each other at rates of 1 to 15 centimeters per year, resulting in continental drift. Deformation occurs at plate boundaries, while internally the plates remain largely intact. The map of Earth's surface constantly changes because of plate tectonics. We have a dynamic planet. Plate tectonics helps to explain earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, formation of mountains, location of continents, location of ocean basins, and more. Let's now talk about plate boundaries. Plate boundaries have tectonic activity because the plates are moving relative to one another through relative motion. Two plates can move away from, toward, or sideways relative to one another. There are three types of plate boundaries. They are divergent boundaries, convergent boundaries, and transform boundaries. As you can see in this figure, at a divergent boundary, two plates move apart relative to one another. In most cases, magma fills the space between the plates. A picture of convergent boundaries here shows two plates moving toward one another. A typical result is that one plate slides under the other. Here's a picture of a transform boundary, which shows two plates moving horizontally past one another. Let's discuss plate interactions relative to plate boundaries, starting with divergent boundaries. We have a divergent boundary in this case, where the crust is recycled. We can only have divergent Oceanic-Oceanic boundaries and Continental-Continental boundaries, but no Oceanic-Continental boundaries or Continental-Oceanic boundaries. Here we are showing some examples of divergent boundaries. In divergent boundaries, the Oceanic-Oceanic interaction creates mid-ocean ridges when Earth's tectonic plates diverge and move apart. In the oceans, mid-ocean ridges are places where new crust forms as two oceanic plates move apart. Ridges are the sites of many small to moderate-sized earthquakes and much more submarine volcanism. More divergent plates are beneath oceans, but a divergent boundary may also form with a continent. Here is a picture showing the distribution of oceanic ridges. On the continents, divergent motion can split a continent into two pieces, forming a new ocean basin as the pieces move apart. This process, called continental rifting, creates a continental rift, such as the Great Rift Valley in a new ocean basin. East Africa will progressively move away from the continent, as you can see in this figure. So, we have our first result of tectonic plate theory. We have explained the presence of large mid-ocean ridge systems on the seafloor and rift valleys by using divergent plate boundaries. Here we are showing some examples of convergent boundaries. Now let's move to convergent boundaries. Convergent boundaries form when two plates move toward one another. Convergence can involve two oceanic plates, an oceanic plate and a continental plate, or two continents. Ocean trenches, island arcs, and Earth's largest mountain belt have been formed at convergent boundaries. Many of Earth's most dangerous volcanoes and largest earthquakes occur along these boundaries. Oceanic-Oceanic convergent boundaries start when one plate bends and slides beneath the other plate along an inclined zone. The process of one plate sliding beneath another is called a subduction, and the zone around the downward moving plate is known as a subduction zone, as you can see in these figures. Let's repeat this as we are introducing a new concept here called subduction. Oceanic-Oceanic convergent boundaries start when one plate bends and slides beneath the other plate along an inclined zone. The process of one plate sliding beneath another is called a subduction, and the zone around the downward moving plate is known as a subduction zone, as you can see in these figures. Oceanic-Oceanic convergence boundaries often forms volcanoes on the ocean floor. If the volcanoes emerge as islands, a volcanic island arc is formed, such as in Japan, the Aleutian Islands, and the Tonga Islands. As you can see in this picture, when you have an Oceanic-Continental convergent boundary, the denser the oceanic plate subducts beneath, the more buoyant the continental plate becomes. To elaborate more on the Oceanic-Continental convergence boundary, the denser oceanic slab sinks into the asthenosphere. Along the descending plate, partial melting of the mantle rock generates magma. The resulting volcanic mountain chain is called a continental volcanic arc. Examples of these are the Andes and Cascades. In a continental-continental convergent boundary, commonly called a continental collision, it produces large mountain ranges. Neither is subducted, but the crust is pushed upward or sideways, as shown in this picture. More details on the Continental-Continental Convergent boundary include that the continued subduction can bring two continents together. The less dense, buoyant continental lithosphere does not subduct. The resulting collision between two continental blocks produce mountains, such as the Himalayas, Alps, and the Appalachians. Now we will focus on the formation of the Himalayas. You can see in this picture that among the most dramatic and visible creations of plate tectonic forces are the lofty Himalayas, which stretch 2,900 kilometers along the border between India and Tibet. This immense mountain range began to form between 40 and 50 million years ago, when two large land masses, India and Eurasia, driven by plate movement, collided. Again, this is an example of a continental-continental convergence. About 220 million years ago, India was a large island still situated off the Australian coast. When Pangaea broke apart about 200 million years ago, India began to forge northward at a rate of about 9 meters a century. India rammed into Asia about 50 million years ago. We'll now move to the Pacific Ring of Fire, where volcanoes line the Pacific Ocean around what is called the Pacific Ring of Fire. The volcanoes extend from the southwestern Pacific through the Philippine Islands, Japan and Alaska, and then down the western coast of the Americas. The Ring of Fire results from subduction on both sides of the Pacific. In this picture, you can see subduction of Oceanic to the west, beneath Japan and island arcs of the western Pacific. The new oceanic crust forms along a mid-ocean ridge, and the oceanic lithosphere subducts beneath the Americas. Notice that the Ring of Fire is a combination of two convergent plate boundaries and one divergent plate boundary, a very complex combination. Here is a picture of the Pacific Ring of Fire with its volcanoes shown in red. So we have more results of tectonic plate theory. We have explained mountains and deep oceanic trenches by using convergent plate boundaries. Now let's show some examples of transform boundaries. In the example in this picture at transform boundaries, plates slip horizontally past each other along transform faults. In the oceans, transform faults are associated with mid-ocean ridges. Transform faults combine with spreading centers to form a zigzag pattern on the seafloor. Let me again repeat. At transform boundaries, plates slip horizontally past each other along transform faults. In the oceans, transform faults are associated with mid-ocean ridges. Transform faults combine with spreading centers to form a zigzag pattern on the seafloor. A transform fault can link different types of plate boundaries, such as a mid-ocean ridge and an ocean trench. Some transform boundaries occur beside or within a continent, sliding one large crustal block past another, as occurs along the San Andreas Fault in California, and also along the Alpine Fault of New Zealand. As you can see in this picture, the boundary between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate is mostly a transform boundary, with the Pacific Plate moving northwest relative to the main part of North America. Here is an example of transform faults, or strike-slip faults. This is the San Andreas Fault that we described earlier. The idea of mantle convection proposed by Otto Emperor in 1906 was already rejected by the scientific community, even before Wegener's time. Turns out to be correct. The mantle convection is the mechanism of divergent and convergent plate boundaries, as illustrated in this picture. Mantle convection occurs when plates of the lithosphere are moved around by the underlying hot mantle convection cells, as illustrated in this picture. In the mantle, hot material rises towards the lithosphere. The hot material reaches the base of the lithosphere, where it cools, and sinks back down through the mantle. The cool material is replaced by more hot material, and so on, forming a large convection cell, as illustrated again in this picture. This slow but incessant movement in the mantle causes the rigid tectonic plates to move or float around the Earth's surface at an equally slow rate. So, we have more results of tectonic plate theory. We have explained the mechanism of continental drift by using transform plate boundaries. Let's review key words of the plate interactions we discussed, starting with divergent boundaries. These are Oceanic-Oceanic interactions that create mid-ocean ridges. Divergent boundaries also have Continental-Continental interactions that have created the Great Rift Valley over millions of years. Convergent boundaries have Oceanic-Oceanic interactions that create ocean trenches and subduction of oceanic plates. Convergent boundaries also have Oceanic-Continental interactions that create ocean trenches and subduction of oceanic plates. Convergent boundaries have Continental-Continental interactions that create continental collision. There is no subduction involved. Last, we have transform faults. Here is a summary of plate interactions. The creation, expansion, and subduction of plates described here take place on a geological timescale. It took 100 million years to create the seafloor of the Atlantic Ocean. The speed of creation, expansion, and subduction of plates is measured in centimeters per year. As you can see, this is not a speed to directly endanger humans, yet. The subduction in the mantle concerns only oceans. The continents do not subduct in the mantle. Remember, there is a large selection of iMode education lectures which can further enhance your knowledge of earthquakes, volcanoes, climate, and energy. Thank you for your attention and good luck.